months ago, all the players who are here today embarked on a journey that we have not seen any player in World of Warcraft do before. The MDI already starting to make history here. We have players from all over the world, 4 different regions that have made it to this point. The first ever LAN, the first ever global finals. Now we get to see out of these 4 regions for the first time who is the best in Legion, who is going to win the first ever international tournament, the first ever LAN. The global finals of the MDI starts now.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the first ever Mythic Dungeon Invitational LAN Final. My name is Robert Wing, and helping me to kick off today's show, some familiar faces, Sloot, Jack, Sowers. Gentlemen, I am extremely excited about having the opportunity to participate in what is, as Rich said, a momentous kind of historic occasion for the program. How are you all feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I mean, this is it. This is what we've been waiting for ages. These teams are here to compete. I'm really excited right now.
Yeah, couldn't be happier to be a part of the program. Like you said, the first LAN that we've been able to have for the Mythic Dungeon Invitational. It's just a joy to be a part of it. Yeah,
it was a huge honor to be here on the desk, especially for the first series. This LAN is incredible. Like, so many players have wanted something like this for such a long time, and the fact that it's finally happening is it's remarkable. So this is going to be a really excellent day.
Unsurprising to everyone at home, everyone on the desk is excited to be here, but let's talk about why the players are here, what they're competing for now. They're going to be competing as part of a larger program, obviously, with a goal of taking home a share of $100,000 in prizing. That's not the only thing they'll be fighting for, but certainly that is a big part of the incentive to get out there, grind through time trials, make it all the way to this global stage. Again, $100,000, nothing to shirk at. Now, along with that, they will also be looking to obviously qualify for the recently announced Mythic Dungeon Invitational All-Star program at BlizzCon. So first of its kind, very exciting. Gentlemen, so much on the line. What would you be most excited to compete for?
Why not both?
Good point.
I think BlizzCon is really just the biggest thing, I think, for a lot of these players when we had an opportunity to talk to them and be able to say, like, what is the really big thing that you want to be able to do? And it's BlizzCon, right? We've seen, you know, a couple times where we have, you know, raid races in the past, but a lot of times you're focusing on the PvP side. So when these teams are, you know, really focused on hardcore PvE and get opportunity to play on the biggest stage of the year, that's incredible.
Yeah, certainly they're all very excited to make it to that point. But as we said, so much on the line. Let's go ahead and take a look at the 8 teams we have assembled here. Again, this is the culmination of 4 regional weekends. So we have teams from all around the world. Jack, walk us through what you see on the screen.
All right, first game of the day is going to be China versus North America in Skyline.D and Omegasniped, followed by EU versus Oceanic with Shells Angels versus Gulch Trotters. Then another NA versus China with Method NA and Sun Sky. And then wrapping it up with, again, another EU versus Oceanic, Oceanic versus EU and Free Marcy and Method PogChamp.
Yeah, in this case, we really did save the best for last, as we have these returning champions. Marcy, last year, it was a big deal. Marcy was freed. Marcy got out of the cage. Marcy has since been recaptured, and unfortunately, the team's back here to, you know, try to win freedom once again. Sowers, looking across these teams as we have had an opportunity to get to know them over this weekend, what are you thinking? Do you think they could do the repeat? Do you think they're going to be second-time champions?
I think, you know, Free Marcy is going to be really hard-pressed to take another victory here, but these guys are incredibly good players, and so they've got the strategies, they've got the skills. All they have to do is play their own game and execute, and we might be able to see them on top once again.
Yeah, going to be a lot of tough competition they really have to get through. I mean, it's certainly, once you get to this point, you would expect everyone to kind of be on that level, but this tournament is absolutely stacked. Our first match of the day, though, is going to be Skyline.D taking on Team Omegasniped. Now, these teams had 2 very different stories in the regional play. Obviously, Team Omegasniped went down to the lower bracket right from the beginning and had a hard-fought battle to obviously get there where they eventually ended up, and Skyline.D didn't drop a single map, so for both of these teams, this is certainly a unique opportunity that's really only made even more unique by the fact that they get to do this at LAN.
Yeah, and the most interesting thing is that, you know, we saw such a huge performance coming out of Skyline.D, just really well performed. Not the best times, but they kind of had an advantage and a disadvantage. They went first, but then they had the opportunity to see how all the other teams performed afterwards, and have just had, they're kind of just in the dark. All the teams are a bit worried about how they're going to perform.
Yeah, certainly it was a teams were highlighting the fact that they were very creative, right? That was the strength of Skyline.D, as these teams were saying. And as you can actually see here, unfortunately, the Chinese teams will not be able to join us on site here in Columbus, Ohio, due to visa issues. But we have scoped out secure places for them to play that maintain that all-important competitive integrity. And as you see on the screen, they are actually currently ready and waiting to go.
Yeah, and being able to still have that LAN environment here, you know, it's the big change going from playing just at home, you know, in your own comfortable environment, to going to LAN or even meeting some of your teammates for the very first time. So great to be able to see them still be able to compete.
Yeah, it's certainly a marvel of modern technology, but we're doing it, and we're making sure they're able to play the fairway with the rest of the teams here in Columbus. So let's go ahead and take a look, though, at the map pool. Where, again, these teams won't be starting off in Maw of Souls as we were in the regional weekends, and certainly I think we're all excited for a little bit of a break from Maw of Souls. Ted, I know you're very deeply attached to that map just because, obviously, you had the opportunity to run it so many fun times.
I mean, it's just, you know, we say it every time, the great AP grind of 2017. But, you know, we are starting with that Darkheart Thicket, like you mentioned, Rob. And this is one of those kind of home-feely maps that we've talked about often, Rob, and you mentioned it is that way, too. It is one of those classic maps that a lot of people revert to. And I know, you know, just like Jack mentioned earlier, we have been talking to a lot of these teams, and a lot of the mentality is that win the first game, win the first game, win the first game. You know, we'll see what happens in the second, and then win the third. So there's going to be a huge amount of pressure from Darkheart Thicket, and some of these teams are talking a big game for this map right now.
Certainly, it's one of those maps that, as you were saying, you know, we've had a chance to see since 7.0. This is one of these original maps. You know, certainly there are some newer maps where you'd expect that maybe they aren't quite mastered just yet, even though they have been out a while. It's like, what are you actually practicing for? How much time do you commit? But Darkheart Thicket is definitely a map where everyone really should kind of have it under wraps. Sowers, you know, in talking to the teams, obviously you've spent a lot of time with the players this week. You know, what are they saying about this map?
You know, a lot of teams are cooking up some really good strategies for this map. I know Omegasniped has really been polishing their brains to pull out some really good times in here. These affixes are quite nasty in here, of course. It is going to be sanguine, bolstering, fortified. So the potential for something to go disastrously wrong is definitely there, but that fortified affix means that these teams can go incredibly fast in here because the bosses are going to be a lot less lethal.
Yeah, certainly another point of consideration is obviously these team compositions. Throughout the tournament, we've seen some hallmarks, you know, things we kind of expect here, versus some obviously creative twists, especially when we've dealt with China and Asia Pacific. Jack, what are you expecting as we look at these compositions for these two teams?
I think Omegasniped really has just kind of found its, you know, sweet spot. It has kind of found its, you know, safe area there. You know, having overall, I'd probably just see, you know, very strong consistency out of like Zongo on Rogue, either going to be Monk or Rogue going into that. You know, of course, you're going to be having the Blood DK going into it, but you know, recently we've also had the eye level increase for the weapons. You might be seeing a lot more casters and more opportunity there.
All right, well, these team compositions are up, and let's go and take a look at these. You know, Sloot, what are you seeing when we look at these?
I mean, really no shock to see the Windwalkers. And, you know, the Rogues coming out here is not a huge surprise. I wouldn't be shocked to see some of these teams in this bolstering environment actually pulling some of the trash with the bosses, getting the buffed on that single target damage, killing the boss prior to the trash, and then downing it. And, you know, I mean, we're all equally shocked, of course, to see the Blood DKs come out on both teams. When you're talking about a lethal amount of trash and needing to pinpoint it down, you got to have that AoE grip, plus the support for some of these bosses with that leech.
Yeah, I'm really excited to see the Monks, right? We saw throughout the regionals as Monk has kind of risen to power, certainly capable of dealing a ton of damage, but we did see a lot of deaths coming out from these Monks, players who maybe weren't as comfortable on the Monks as, say, they were in other classes. You know, Jack, are you expecting the Monk play to have improved since the regional?
Oh, considerably. And we've seen a lot of times where you do have those, you know, defensive capabilities, you do have, you know, those resources as a Monk, but there are so many dangerous things in melee, especially in, you know, Darkheart Thicket, for example, with bolstering and Sanguine. There are going to be plenty of hazards going on to there, but I think, you know, the team should be more than prepared at this point to be able to deal with a lot of that.
All right, well, obviously wouldn't be MDI without us polling the desk. And now that we have a larger desk, we can obviously get more opinions, so certainly excited to get those, but also excited to get the votes of you at home. So for this one, we have gone ahead and rigged up through the power of technology, Twitch voting. So you can actually get in on the action. Let us know who you think will take this first series. Is it hashtag SLD or hashtag OMS? And maybe over the course of the weekend, we can kind of see who wins out more versus the casters or Twitch chat. You know, I'm no stranger to Twitch chat, and obviously Twitch chat is always correct, right there next to Reddit. So casters, you're going to have to go up against them. Let's go down the line here. Sloot, who takes his first series?
Is there no way to see what Twitch chat says first and then do it?
I mean, you can do your own homework, man. Stay in your lane.
I think this one's going to go to Team Omegasniped. I mean, they're just so, they've been put through the test. They just had such a hard climb up. Not an easy road for them, and I know they've been putting a ton of practice in. We've had a chance to talk to all of the members over the course of the week, and yeah, my vote goes with them for sure.
Yeah, certainly, Skyline.D, it's worth noting, are also dealing with some slight roster tweaks, so that is a consideration point when we obviously evaluate the strength of these teams. Jack, who wins?
I think it'd also be Omegasniped for me. I mean, they are such a hungry team, and they, like you said, they've had such a hard road to be able to get out of the lower bracket in North America. And for a lot of the teams out here, we've seen, they met element of practice. We've seen where they're probably going to be at. But with Skyline.D, it has been such a long time since we've seen them play, and seeing if they're going to actually opt to start copying a lot of the Europe or North American strategies, I'm not quite sure, or if they're going to still go their own path, but Omegasniped would take it from me.
All right, I just want to point out thus far, 2 North American casters have chosen the North American team. Sowers, are you going to do us in for just the full bias desk, or what are you looking at?
I'm gonna triple down on it. Skyline.D looked incredibly well polished in their regional stage. They had barely any deaths at all across the whole series, but we're still going only barely faster or even often slower than Omegasniped was in all of those dungeons. So if Omegasniped just cleans up their play a little bit, I think this game is definitely in their bag.
All right, obviously, I want to point out that while the casters on the desk have all gone the way of Team Omegasniped, they had certainly a rough road and a rough first round when we saw them in the North American Regional. So keep that in mind. Skyline.D haven't dropped a single map. We're going to see if the predictions hold up, what Twitch Stat thinks. Let's go ahead and get into Darkheart Thicket, our very first match of the Mythic Dungeon Invitational Land Final.
Jack, here we are back in the thick of things, as of course our good friend Adrian would say, who was not able to join us today. But we talk about this map all the time, and we're going to see some pretty big pulls coming up. But these teams, like I mentioned earlier, have both some huge pulls coming up, some really short map times. We see the stealth coming up right away from Skyline.D on the left side as they skip that first cat and owl pack.
Yeah, and at this point, we've seen a lot of talk about, as we've been able to, work with teams for like media days and things like that, about what their, where their attitude has been or where their nerves have kind of been for these. And we've seen, Omegasniped definitely early on felt like they had those big nerves, but very confident pull coming out of them as they're popping Bloodlust here, be able to get that extra bear pack down, as you're seeing Skyline.D just kind of rounding the corner, making sure they're taking just a little bit slower. Fired Up is going down here. They need to be able to get him up very quickly here. And like we were talking about, the extra dangers and hazards that they can go out for a lot of the monks and melee right there.
And just tons of damage coming up. Keep in mind, we are in this bolstering environment, so of course not volcanic, where every time one of these trash mobs dies, we will have the rest of the trash and any surrounding enemies buffed by 20% damage and health overall.
Yeah, but you're seeing here is that just Omegasniped is wiping up the rest of this trash here. They do have to be dealing with a lot of these crazed verbs that can be so dangerous with the charges that are going out here. So at this point, a lot of it is just making sure as Hadron's slowly, steadily moving away from kind of getting some distance. That way all the charges are going to be in the exact same spot every time. Great positioning by Zongo and Fire Up to make sure they're keeping their distance and have a good idea of where those mobs are going to be going, and killing them at the same time to make sure that the Sanguine is not going to be healing the other one.
I mean, those hippogriffs took just a bit long to get down. They got some of that buff from the bolstering just a bit too high. Skyline.D has already moved ahead. Of course, they are only 3% behind trash, but there's a lot of trash in this dungeon that they could use to their advantage.
Yeah, but it's just, of course, they're pulling, again, the caster mobs right there, making sure they're getting the Ruiners up front to be able to deal with them very quickly. You're probably going to be looking at, maybe Zongo to be able to run ahead and start the RP out before maybe you have him, or maybe the tank to be able to pull the bears away. Make sure that the rest of the group is going to be able to pass by them without having to worry about them.
So we already see Skyline.D moving up, doing the skip with the bears. As you mentioned, the Resto Druid getting ready on the side over there with Miyu. Team Omegasniped is already preparing to pull Gladealis soon, finishing up that last pack, and then they will have to deal with those 2 bears. Pulling them to the side, as we often see, as you mentioned, Zongo will likely use that stealth, barely get out of the way, and get ready to pull the first boss, Gladealis.
Yep, you are seeing for Skyline.D there, popping the Bloodlust on to Gladealis, as Omegasniped is just getting rid of the rest of the trash here. So Skyline.D just a tiny bit ahead in terms of just pulling the boss and getting their lust off here. But of course, Omegasniped has a bit of an advantage in terms of their in terms of the trash percentage.
So we see the skip over here coming up with the Warlock portal on the side as they move just past the 2 bears, actually. This time they don't need to pull the bears to the side, as we often see teams do, usually leading to a death or some kind of vanish from the rogue. So they just move over to the side, wait for the RP now with Gladealis. Now keep in mind, those mobs, those NPCs, the neutral ones that Gladealis kills, do drop Sanguine on the ground. Not the most dangerous affix, but certainly you want to be mindful of the kind of AoE area that it restricts the players from moving. Gladealis down to 42% already for Skyline.D on the left side. Team Omegasniped just now rearing up to pull the boss in a moment. Only 3% percent ahead on trash. Jack, we're really seeing that kind of reformed, refined team coming out of Skyline.D that we saw in their regionals as well. Looks like they're a powerhouse right now.
Yeah, it looks like they're in quite an excellent position as Omegasniped is just now pulling the boss here. You're seeing pretty good positioning out of Zyronic here, making sure that he is the furthest target back as Luffy is able to pop all of his cooldowns and start dumping damage into the boss here. So when you're going to be having Gledalis coming out, he will always jump to the furthest away target, which can make it very easy to, you know, decide who will be taking all that damage. He will put a bleed onto them and make sure, and which will continuously tick damage until they're topped off. So it's very important to make sure that whoever is going to be standing out the furthest is going to be having the most defensive capabilities possible. But also, like we saw, Zyronic stood out, he popped his defensives early, then Luffy is able to get out a little bit earlier to be able to bait out the jumps a little bit later.
And as we mentioned earlier, we do see that the trash is pulled with the boss regardless of this bolster affix. As long as the trash doesn't die, it will not buff the boss. So both teams kind of balancing the health, making sure to kill that boss first. As we see another leap go out there for Team Omegasniped on the right side of the screen. Should be downing the boss soon, but Skyline.D moving well ahead, just having a really refined run here, knowing exactly what they need to CC, getting in the way, pulling that Dryad, and doing a bit of a bigger pull here. Now, typically we do see a skip on this left side, so it's probably some of the pre-calculated percentage of trash that they're doing, so we'll have to keep an eye on what they do as the flowers, of course, poured in there by the house, as we know, a trick that teams often use. Team Omegasniped on the right side, just about to downgrade Dallas, after which they'll drag this trash over and start cleaving it down as they move over to the house area as well.
Yeah, and great job there to make sure that they are already pulling an extra trash here before the boss went down. That way they're able to start, you know, get started on it, not have to worry about bolstering the boss on accident or anything like that. Skyline.D's got just a little bit of an advantage, but it'll be interesting to see the Bloodlust timings, because Omegasniped did actually pop Bloodlust almost immediately on their very first trash back that they pulled. So it'll be interesting to see if that's going to give them any kind of slight advantage here as we get a little bit deeper into the instance.
I mean, both teams will have that second Bloodlust at some point in this dungeon, but you're right, it is going to be interesting to see if they use it at the same place or not. MGT dipping quite low there, proccing that cheat death, but no danger with him. Rain's getting really low here, proccing the Purg right now as he kites slowly away from these bolstered mobs, barely hanging on to his health, making sure that he constantly kites, moving out of that Sanguine, which of course will heal and damage any friendly players in there, but heal any enemies as they stay in. So he's safely getting to the side. The team is helping to peel with some of those punts and typhoons as well, as Team Omegasniped is now doing a similar pull, mass pull here, especially with those keepers. We already see that Purg prop on Hadrian.
Yeah, it's very important to make sure you're getting the keepers down as rapidly as possible. I just seen Eagle going down from the side of Skyline.D here. You have to be dealing with some very heavily bolstered blossoms here that were dipping into the Sanguine quite a bit. So this is going to be a lot of wasted time here. And you are seeing Rains going down as well as Fang. It looks like it will just be a full team wipe, because when the blossoms get so bolstered up and they get all the extra healing onto it, a lot of times it is just going to be quicker to wipe, get back to them, and be able to neutralize them very quickly, you know. But it also shows just a little bit of lack of polish by the team, where they're not focusing targets correctly and they're just getting so many millions of extra HP that they really could have avoided.
I mean, that was a lot of flower power right there. But I think that was a purposeful wipe. They were just so bolstered right now, coming back in, pulling them after they lose all those bolster stacks and get ready again. But that's an extra 5 deaths on the board, Jack. You know, Wayo's mentioned it. And with how good the teams are here this weekend, every death is going to count, adding that extra 5 seconds to the timer every time. Team Omegasniped still slowly working at this pack, making sure to accurately DPS everything down equally. You want to make sure you're killing everything at the same pace, otherwise you're going to end up in the situation that Skyline.D had.
Yeah, at this point they're just making sure that they're able to get through and start catching up to the rest of the group. You are having those extra deaths going out here as Skyline.D is, of course, just pulling all these extra blossoms in, trying to get through the rest of the trash, move on, of course, to the next boss. But as Omegasniped is just dealing with the last of them, Hadron is perk procking once again here. Luffy just needs to be able to catch up and just get, you know, Hadron topped off, get him stabilized. But it's also kind of the risk that you're seeing with the healers is when you're able to just ignore your tank, when you're able to be able to focus him a lot more, you know, with the areas that he's going to be needing a lot more support. Because in a lot of cases, especially as we get deeper into Legion, it is just so much easier for healers to spend as little time as possible healing. So there's so much focus in the MDI about how much damage healers can pump out.
And as these flowers are dying, of course, you want to make sure that you back petal as much as you can, getting them out of this Sanguine on the floor. Now, they're kind of finding themselves in a precarious position here. That is a dead end where Hadrian has kited these blossoms in the corner, so there will be some Sanguine that they may need to jump across. Not too dangerous as long as there's not too many overlaid stacks. One more flower gets one tick of Sanguine. They're going to cost them just a couple of extra seconds, but they should be able to head off down to Oak towards the second boss in a moment as that last Dryad's outside. That's a fair bit of bolster stacks. Some of them were probably avoided on the Dryad, as you can outrange the bolster stacks between mobs. I believe it's 40 or 50 yards, something like that. So they do move them out of the way and make sure not to grip the Dryad as they're dying. But now we move over to Skyline.D on the left as they pull these Dwellers, the 5 GUIs that we often talk about, Jack. Pretty dangerous mobs in this fortified setting.
Yeah, and at this point they're making sure that you'll be able to rotate through stuns, through Belf silences, to be able to make sure they're always getting those interrupts out. While there is a ton of damage that goes out onto your players, especially in a fortified setting onto it. It's also the fear that can go at the end of the cast there you really don't want to have to be dealing with or worry about here. So they're doing a great job to be able to make sure they're rotating through CDs, rotating through any kind of CCs they have available to them, and then of course making sure they're gripping those mobs out. Really good play out of Reigns, gripping the lowest health mob out, making sure Sanguine was dropping far away from the rest of the group, and then you're seeing the Ring of Peace coming out for the last of them.
And of course, once these 5 dwellers die, Oakheart will come out of his petrified state and will start lumbering around. The teams will get ready in just a moment. Don't shake your head at me, Jack. The teams will get ready in just a moment to pull Oakheart here. Now, a pretty dangerous boss, usually in a fortified setting, Jack. I know from a healer perspective, he does have that AoE stomp once every 30 seconds or so. That does quite a bit of damage, but we are in this fortified setting. Nothing too dangerous. On Tyrannical is something to worry about, but I wouldn't be shocked to see some of the teams, as we do see the rogue MGT run off to the side and get some pulls going with some extra trash, as we saw in the first boss, combining it with Oakheart and making sure that they don't kill it before the boss dies, but just trying to maximize efficiency here for trash and boss.
And we've seen that so many times at a Skyline.D during the regional phase, where they were more than happy to pull extra mobs into the boss, even if it was in a bolstering setting. That way they'd be able to just have both of the rogues. Of course, they don't have their second one with us today. They had the substitute, but they, ideally be able to pump out that extra single target damage, making it a lot easier for them to just neutralize these bosses as rapidly as possible. And that's what we've seen so many times, is the teams have been fairly close together in how they've been dealing with the larger pulls to be able to get all the mobs down together. But when it comes to boss damage, there's so many big advantages that teams want to be able to get for themselves, whether it's pulling extra trash, whether they're going to, their healers straight up ignoring their tank for the first, minute or two of the fight. Anything that they can do to be able to get these little advantages has made such a big difference.
I certainly know what it's like to be ignored from the healer playing with you, but we do have to watch out. Every 30 seconds, the boss will as well do a crushing grip on the tank as he grabs him, holds him tight for a pretty heavy nature dot, and then will throw him at one of the players and, giving some minor AoE damage. Nothing too bad. It's really the danger coming here from the trash on top of the boss that players will have to watch out for, but they're not getting too much damage in on top of the team, of course. And Eepel, as you mentioned, they're not at the full strength, but Eepel's certainly not a player to scoff at, as we do see a death going down on the Havoc Demon Hunter on Fang. They get him up immediately and continue. Yeah,
and at this point, they've done such an excellent job. It hasn't been too bad to actually have an Oakheart and the other bats going out with them, getting that extra cleave damage in, and at this point, they do such a good job kind of controlling the extra AoE that they can be putting out, funneling their single target damage so well into it, and then the Bloodseekers are almost dead. It's perfect.
Skyline.D downing Oakheart, getting rid of those last Bloodseekers, the bats on the side, and will be working their way over to Dresser on the third boss of the dungeon, keeping an eye, of course, on the right side of the screen. Team Omegasniped still working at Oakheart. Looks like they pulled a fair bit more trash. They do have the Lashers as well in that pack. I'm not sure if that was the patrol from earlier. I believe it was coming down the hill, so they pulled that on top of the boss. You only need the Dwellers to die to spawn the boss, so they have a fair bit more trash going on here on top of Oakheart. Now, we do see Skyline.D inevitably ahead of the pack right now, but they do have that 8 death differential, a whopping 40 seconds on the clock, and with how short this map is, that's going to be devastating by the end.
Yeah, and at this point, a lot of times we are seeing these kind of snowball effects where teams are saying like, oh, there's so much more ahead, or there's so much of this. By having the extra deaths counter going out there, like you said, 40 seconds is going to make a incredible difference here, because at this point, Oakheart is almost down. They're pulling all those extra flowers into it. They're already working on all the trash that's going out there. Omegasniped is definitely still into this.
Absolutely. Slime's getting pulled here by Skyline.D as they move towards Dresser on the third boss of the dungeon. Nothing too dangerous here, pretty scripted encounter in that, but he does have a bit of randomness in terms of will he cast his AoE pushback on the team, or will he cast one of the cave-ins first? Those strategies requiring opposing kind of mechanics to deal with. You'll have to group up under the boss to get pushed away as little as possible from the AoE pushback from his wins, but of course you will need to bait and spread out and get away from the boss for the cave-in, as to not have to move the boss too far. So we'll have to see which one hits Skyline.D first. Usually we have that pushback first. They do pull some extra wolves on the side, as we mentioned earlier, for that buff single target damage on top of the boss, especially coming out of the rogue, that we can see right now is booming in damage.
Right, you are, Ted, and it's very important to make sure that they're going to be, watching their positioning as they're getting this knockback here. Reigns doing an excellent job making sure he's staying very close into the boss here. Not only, to make sure he's not pulling any extra whelpings that he doesn't need to, but also for watching out for the breath coming out of Dresser here, because it will be targeting, of course, the nearest target with the highest threat. So it's always very important. Even if he gets out of range just for a little bit, it could easily just turn the boss around and start breathing onto the melee and just spell disaster for them.
Right, you are. So they do have to be on their toes as they push some more whelps. I like seeing this out of teams, Jack. We comment about this all the time. You can see they're already starting to slowly drag it towards the exit as Dresser is decreasing in health, getting ready to save any of those precious seconds. Now, there's not too many seconds saved on this encounter, because once Dresser goes down, you will have a bit of RP as the kind of vine wall goes down before you have access to Xavius' log. So we'll have to see what they do. But Dresser quite low right now. A lot of those whelplings dying, and really well played by them.
Well played indeed, Ted. Love it. You've seen Omegasniped is about 85% as Skyline.D is almost wrapping up Drezeron at this point. And so I think at this point, it's fair to say that they're a little bit over the 40-second mark in terms of the advantage that Skyline.D has established for themselves. But it will be very important to see this just last pull, the last leg of the journey here, because there are so many deadly mobs here, and especially depending on how big they're going. Because at this point, they're not able to actually see like they would be in the regional stage or like they were at home to be able to see how your other opposing team is going to be going. You know, you're not able to know where they're going to be at, how they're going to be, facing up against you. So at this point, both teams are kind of just flying blind, and they have to follow their own plan and execute.
You're absolutely right. Both teams opt to skip the caster pack, but it looks like, oh no, that was on purpose. So they do skip past that first patrol, combine the bats, the Bloodseekers, along with the caster pack here, making sure to get grip them all together. Now, there's some important interrupts that you want to get out here, especially in the fortified setting. You have that Shadow Bolt that goes out on the tank. Not too dangerous if the tank is prepared for it, but more importantly, Jack, especially for the healing in the group, is that Dread Inferno. You want to kick that, otherwise it provides an AoE area denial debuff that will explode after some time. As we see one go off on the side, they move over to the side. Damage lost, of course. Melee needs to move out and do nothing, and the healer needs to get a lot of healing in.
Yeah, great move there by Fang to actually make sure that he nether walked before he got it, because he actually ended up getting 2 Dread Infernos onto him at almost the exact same time here. So he got out of the group, used his nether walk, immune the damage, and it was actually a fantastic move there. As they also have excellent position, kind of like you've been mentioning, they're not only dragging towards the next objective, towards the next target, but they're also doing an excellent job keeping everything out of the Sanguine as rapidly as possible. Omegasniped getting, of course, Drezeron down, and now they are moving on, trying to catch up as best as they can here.
Skyline.D backpedaling towards the last group, which they will not need for their 100% likely, but Rain's proccing his Purg there right now. He's finding himself in a very precarious situation where he will have to run back through the bats as he just did there, which was so dangerous. They're already bolstered from the 4 caster pack that they killed when they combined them together.
Yeah, it's very important to note here that as Mayu is actually not able to be dispelling the diseases that the bats are putting out to him, it's so much extra dot damage that will be going out, whereas Luffy on the other side of Team Omegasniped will be able to have those more frequent and constant dispels here, so Hadron will have a little bit of an easier time going out through that here. But you're just seeing Omegasniped is at 92%, and they've kind of been backtracking a little bit more. They weren't playing quite as aggressively having that combined pack there, but it will be interesting to see, you know, as Skyline.D is a little bit behind in terms of the, or not quite at 100% in terms of trash percentage, if they're going to be going back or maybe they missed something along the way.
I mean, they do have the trash pack right before Xavier, so they can kind of turn around and nuke one mob. As soon as that last mob dies, all they need to worry about is the mobs basically just despawn and go neutral, and they'll finish the dungeon at that point. But they do get started on Shade of Xavier, the final boss of the encounter, of the dungeon, excuse me. A lot of damage to watch out for here. Team Omegasniped doing a fairly large pull on their own, seeing that Dread Inferno go out on the right side of the screen. Got to keep an eye on their health. They do have 2 deaths on the board now and 0 battle reses, much like Skyline.D. But Skyline.D just chewing through the health of Xavier. We're, of course, in that non-tyrannical, the fortified setting, so Shade should go down, but even in this 23 fortified setting, Jack, there's going to be a lot of damage going out as we see that She Death proc on MGT already. Some things that the healer just has to watch out for, and that inevitably the healer can't almost do anything about outside of providing some Iron Bark for some of those Nightmare Bolts.
Yeah, at this point, a lot of it is going to be on the defensive capabilities of each team. 23 is kind of at that interesting borderline where if they don't have those extra defensives, it can be very important to watch out for. You are seeing Luffy going down here, and like you said, no battle res left available. They need to be able to deal with the last of these bolstered mobs. They need to be able to get out of combat here. Skyline.D here just hitting that 50% transition mark, so they are having that big AoE burst going out. And like you said, you know, it can be pretty dangerous seeing, you know, the extra Nightmare Bolts going out and being as defensive as possible here, or having to weigh whether you're going to play more defensively in gear or if you're more offensive, especially because you don't know what the other team's doing.
So we see that, of course, that Paranoia is moved out by Mayu over on Skyline.D, wanting to make sure nobody gets in that zone. But now he gets debuffed with that Nightmare Bolt pacification area, wanting to make sure that one more player at least is within that area. Otherwise, he will be unable to cast or attack or do anything, really. But they will be downing Shade of Xavier soon. Team Omegasniped, a bit sloppy on that last pull. Of course, no full wipe. They do manage to res Luffy, but was looking a bit dire there at the end. But they are getting ready as well to pull Shade in a moment.
Yeah, you're seeing Fang going down on the side of Skyline.D here. Is there a 10% left on the boss? Again, no extra battle reses left available to them, so you kind of have to burn that last little percent. Thankfully, we're in the fortified setting, so it's not going to be too big of a difference for the rest of the team here as they're just mopping up the last of it. But again, they still have that 2% trash percentage that they have to make up here as Omegasniped is just now starting with Xavius.
Skyline.D finishes off Xavius, rushes over to that trash pack that we just mentioned before, likely to kill the lowest health mob, which I believe will be that imp on the side. Should give the remaining percentage. Team Omegasniped on the right side, moving over Shade of Xavius, 74% right now. They will, of course, have that extra 45 seconds to try and finish off the rest of this dungeon. So as soon as Skyline.D gets that 100% on the board, we'll have some time. But we see I'm Fired Up going down, no battle res available, and just a huge pull coming up for Team Omegasniped.
Yeah, at this point, Skyline.D is losing Mayu as well here. So 11 deaths on the board. They have their 100% trash percentage. Their time has been finalized. Now that they've got that 100%. But Omegasniped losing one of their DPS in the middle of their Bloodlust timing. They're still having all the extra cleave damage is going to be going on here. So very important that they have to make up this time as best as they can, but it really is just looking like a dire situation for them.
Yeah, I'm not really sure where those Bloodseekers came from in the end, and they need it for only 1%, so I believe it's the ones that they skipped earlier in the pack. Grabbing them on top of Xavius right now is going to be a long time before they're able to kill this. Lots of healing is going to be coming out. Luckily, that dot does go on Zyronic, who's able to just kind of help the healer through it with a lot of that drain. Hadrian getting a lot of those dots from the bats, which not only do a ton of damage that you mentioned earlier, Jack, but also leech health from the tanking, give them back to the bats, providing a lot of extended life on them, which is the last thing you want to see. We see the Purgatory proc over on Hadrian. Things are looking pretty messy right now, and the time is ticking down for the team, and it looks like that's just going to do it for them as Hadrian does go down, and we actually have Skyline.D claiming the first game. I mean, that was an excellent performance, Jack, from Skyline.D. And we were talking just about how refined they are and how great they looked in their regionals. And even though they had a bit of a roster change up here, I mean, they were just looking the exact same powerhouse.
Roster change proves not to be an issue. And we went into this talking about the fact that Skyline.D was praised by other teams for their creativity, their willingness to innovate in how they approach the game. And, you know, what is a month and a half realistically to watch other teams to practice? What does it ultimately mean? And we can tell there just in how aggressively they were playing it, that was a totally different team in terms of how much they were really prioritizing speed as a resource. Speed was the primary thing, and we heard that from teams all throughout our interviews with them. Speed is what matters. It's not can you survive, you have to survive. It's not how much damage can you do, you just have to do it. It's how fast can you make this run, and Skyline.D looking very powerful early on.
Yeah, I like to be able to see, you know, like you mentioned, being able to see other teams' strategies, being able to refine your own. It goes such a far way in being able to actually take on teams from another region.
All right, well, Skyline.D currently with the advantage. Will they be able to close out this first series of the day, or will Team Omegasniped snipe back? We'll find out after the break. For the Alliance, indeed. Certainly something I alone on the desk stand for. But, don't worry, anyone out there with you. Obviously, Skyline.D now currently 1-0 over Team Omegasniped, and that's in stark contrast to kind of maybe some of the caster predictions, but this is why I don't predict things, by the way. Sours, obviously you were watching the match from the back the whole time, and you actually picked out a play that you wanted to highlight for us. Yeah,
so Skyline.D, they were just pulling ahead every single pull of the dungeon, but there is one pull where we did see quite a big hiccup, so I do want to look at that a little bit more closely so we can see kind of the danger that Bolster Sanguine poses here in this dungeon. You know, like, so many mobs in this dungeon can just go like a little poorly, and you see here that these mobs are going to cast Root Burst right when the mobs around them die. This Sanguine goes off, Eepel falls down, perhaps he gets hit by a Root Burst, which does an incredible amount of damage, or standing maybe in a tick of Sanguine. And you know, each tick of Sanguine, of course, is a percentage health heal. So when these mobs are at these high bolster stacks, each Sanguine tick is like that much more extra time they have to do. You know, this is the huge wipe out of Skyline.D. This was a really big opportunity for Omegasniped to come back into the race, but Skyline.D just kept pulling bigger and bigger, and you know, they turned that extra inch into a mile, and then they pulled out just a little bit further ahead at the end of the dungeon.
Right, and as I said before we went to break, when we talked to the teams, we were kind of asking them, like, oh, what do you think of these affixes? What do you think of these maps? And they just kept saying the same thing over and over. What matters is speed. How do we get the dungeon done the most quickly? And that's what we saw from Skyline.D there. You know, they were, we're going to play a little sloppy. The execution's not going to be amazing, but we're going to make sure that we get the fastest possible finish time, and that's exactly what they did. Now, obviously, the Map 2 affixes are locked. This is not something that Team Omegasniped will be able to choose, which is a little bit of a contrast from how we did things in the regional weekends. So, you want to talk us through the format for this event?
I would love to, Robin. My essay or hair looks excellent today. So we have mostly the same as we saw in the regionals earlier. Teams will choose their classes, lock them in for the entirety of the series. They can change specs within those classes, Fire Mage going Frost, for example, but they cannot change classes, so they have to dedicate ahead of time. We know that the first map and affix combination will be locked by Blizzard. The only small change now is that the loser before in the regional stage would pick the map and affix. However, now they do not have access to the affix pick anymore. They will only be choosing the map pick, which allows teams to get some extra practice in on those set affixes on the maps.
Yeah, for sure. And as you were mentioning, there is still a degree of customization in terms of how you approach each map. And, you know, you can actually, obviously, check out what the people playing right now are wearing in terms of their gear. We do have that extension right there, the Twitch MDI tooltips powered by Wowhead. So certainly get out there, see what these teams are using, how that could potentially help your game. Now, talking again about the Twitch poll we launched earlier, let's go ahead and take a look at where these teams are sitting, and I'm going to check down here. And Twitch chat is mostly in the favor of Team Omegasniped. So clearly some NA bias in our chat. But Skyline.D right now, they're kind of making some people eat their words, eat their votes. And, you know, we talked about their run through the Chinese regional. It was perfect. It was undefeated. And certainly some of the other teams had critiques in terms of their speed. But thus far, it looks like they've found a way to get some extra seconds back. And Jack, does this kind of line up with how you expected these teams to improve over the course of those off weeks?
Without a doubt, in terms of Skyline.D, because it was such a long time ago with them being the first regional to actually start going and be able to see everybody else and prepare for the tournament. And one of the nicest things we saw about Skyline.D specifically was with such a quick turnaround time from time trials to the first regional, they had pretty well executed strats throughout the entirety of the tournament, right? So when they're getting a month and a half, 2 months to be able to prepare for the LAN event that's coming up, you know, it should come as no surprise that they've improved drastically, right? What I'd be interested in seeing going here is how much they're going to rely on, you know, maybe, Western strategies, or that they're going to try to focus on their own, and that'll be interesting seeing as they come up to the counter pick.
Yeah, for sure. And obviously they do have, or Team Omegasniped rather, does have that counter pick. And this was another thing we discussed at length with the teams. And teams felt very confident that, look, you're supposed to win your counter pick. That's the map you've practiced. That's what you're expected to win. And, you know, for a lot of our series with some of these teams pretty evenly skilled, we have seen that. But certainly we have seen as well in this event, you know, Sours. Sometimes teams just come out and win your counter pick. You know, what are you looking at here for Team Omegasniped? I know you talk to these guys a fair bit.
Yeah, so something really big out of Team Omegasniped is Luffy is mainly known for his Resto Druid play, and he opted to go on to the Holy Paladin for the series, which is an interesting choice because that Resto Druid Typhoon is really useful for getting the mobs out of the Sanguine puddles. So they must have some high healer damage dungeons in mind for the upcoming series. There's some really good dungeons in this map pool. I know that they're very comfortable at, that they've been practicing a lot. Notably the Cathedral of Eternal Night, as well as the Eye of Ashara. I know they've put a lot of time into. And both of these dungeons, you know, they really complement, you know, that Holy Paladin damage. There's not a lot going on that, that the Paladin can also really just pump, especially in a 23 Tyrannical Eye of Ashara. It should look really, really good.
Yeah, it looks like we are going to be going to Cathedral of Eternal Night, and this is certainly a map that we have seen teams have success on. It's one of those later maps that maybe not everyone got a ton of time to practice on. Certainly a stark contrast to Dark Heart Thicket, again, one of those 7-0 rollouts. Ted, what do you make of this?
Yeah, I'm not shocked to see this. We all did have a great opportunity to talk to these teams, and Cathedral is the one they stated that they're best versed in, and they had a lot of practice in the regionals. Not to mention that this time, if the teams do move on to that kind of grand final stage, it is a forced map, if I'm not mistaken, at the end. So it's a map that the teams really have to practice, and they feel comfortable with it, so here we go. But this is also the team that said earlier, Jack, remember we talked to them, that they're very worried if they lose that first map. They put in a lot of investment in that first win. Nonetheless, let's take a look here at Cathedral.
Yeah, you're seeing Luffy on the right side of your screen here, using his invisibility potion, using, of course, the fastest speed set that he has possible to be able to make sure he's blitzing his way through all these mobs and make sure that he's going to be able to skip ahead. That'll be the interesting thing to see as you're seeing Skyline.D, for example, having everybody in range. You're able to see everyone there, whereas Luffy is running ahead to make sure they're able to have that larger skip. But what you will be seeing is, of course, Luffy going up to the very top, going up into Agronox's room, make sure that he's going to be able to get into position to be able to res the rest of his team using Mass Resurrection, whether it be right below him, getting the res off, and skipping a ton of trash along the way here. Skyline.D here is just working on the last of course, the mini-boss and all the additional trash here, and as you're seeing, Omegasniped taking the nice leap of faith. And
just to mention, of course, we do not have Sanguini Panini Weenie on the map right now. It's actually quaking and bolstering. We do have that bolstering showing up again for the mobs, for the teams, so we're going to have to see exactly how their strategies rely on pulling some of these mobs with the bosses, if they even choose to do that. One of the opportunities being here for Agronox, the first boss, as he does have a lot of flowers in his room, but he is accessible immediately, Jack. As you mentioned, we do see the kind of stealth run that we typically saw in a lot of the regional phases, especially for Europe and NA, running up, doing the res and doing the skip. Now, the risky thing here, Jack, as we've talked about many times, is if they die, the only checkpoint in this dungeon is all the way back at the start, so it's really risky play here from them right now.
Yeah, at this point, it is that all-in move with going on to them, but at this point, especially when we've talked to them in the past, they have to go all in. They have to be able to put everything out into the table here, because we've seen sometimes in the past, especially in the regional stage, some teams that didn't quite make it, didn't quite get back to didn't quite make it out of the group stage, really just played a little too safe, and they really played a little too secure. And when you're not able to see what the other teams are doing, you just have to put everything on the line here.
So unfortunately, we do have a fear go out for Skyline.D, as they did pull that Bat Rider trash. You have to make sure you interrupt that. Cost 2 deaths, 3 deaths on the board now, as we saw that cheat death proc earlier, and the Rogue has released. We still have a death over from the DH, who has not opted to release. Eepel kind of running for his life here, does go down eventually, and we're going to have that perk proc on the tank, and Reigns will be going down as well. A full team wipe coming out of Skyline.D on the side there, just because of that missed interrupt for the fear, so that's going to be devastating for them. Team Omegasniped looking in a really prime position now to clean up the rest of this trash and get ready to pull Agronox.
Yeah, at this point, there's so much extra trash they've taken care of, and of course, Mayu has to just interrupt his cast due to quaking going out there, so it's a little bit of extra time wasted here, as Omegasniped is going to be getting their first checkpoint when they have to be dealing with Agronox. You are having Hadrian going into Purgatory again, and it's very important to be able to watch out for this, because Agronox, even though we're not on a tyrannical setting, it still will be no joke in terms of the damage that can be pumped out into them, and even if, we're having a little bit of issues with ad control, a lot of things kind of compound on each other, so those are really not the areas that you want to see any kind of Purgatory being procced.
Agronox now being pulled, of course, the Corrupted Tree full of Chlorophyll over on the side of Team Omegasniped. Now, you notice how they pull it over to that middle area, that kind of fountain garden area, wanting to make sure that they get the Lashers that spawn on the side, which each fixate one player, funneling in and bottlenecking through the boss so that they can stun, CC, and slow them on top of the boss and effectively cleave them down. The Succulent Lasher, of course, that spawns on top of the boss, particularly dangerous to the tank, does a lot of melee damage, and does do that Succulent Secretion that explodes for damage around the area. Usually you want to stun that, but as long as you move slightly out of its range, it shouldn't be of any harm.
Yeah, at this point, they were rotating through stuns to be able to make sure they're interrupting it when they can, but also just trying to make sure the area denial was as little as possible here. Skyline.D is redoing the pull that had previously wiped them, making sure they're getting all the trash down. Evil is going down once again, and this is what we kind of wanted to see, or kind of wanted to look at, is how well melee, well, not specifically, is how well melee is going to be able to respond to so many different, effects that are going to be going on, especially when Skyline.D is opting for that triple melee composition.
There's a reason that a lot of teams skip the trash downstairs. It's not just because it's effective and it's kind of clever to use that res upstairs, because it is 180-degree radius, three-dimensional for a sphere, if you will. But the biggest deal is that a lot of that trash is just so dangerous. It has frontal cleaves on the tank, turns around with that fell strike, just hits a lot of players, and we could see all these spot deaths plus that full white coming out of Skyline.D. Team Omegasniped downing Agronox now and getting ready to move over. Now, having done this, they have secured the next checkpoint in the dungeon. So should they wipe soon before the death of the next boss, they will not spawn at the beginning of the dungeon, rather over on Agronox.
Yeah, at this point, they're just grabbing some of the trash mobs from the left side of the room, making sure that they're getting everything in together here, as Skyline.D is just kind of working on skipping ahead. You were seeing on the side of Skyline.D, Reigns pulling a lot of those extra mobs to the side, and the rest of the team just skipping on through here because they did previously use their mass stealth for the side of Skyline.D a little bit earlier to be able to skip past some earlier trash mobs. So at that point, that's why you had to see Mayu get everybody rezzed up here. But you are seeing a bunch of deaths coming out on the side of Omegasniped, but again, the checkpoint is just right around the corner.
Yeah, but I mean, sloppy play right there. Zongo has his cheat death go off. We see I'm Fired Up go down. 5 deaths on the board for Team Omegasniped. Of course, 4 of those were on purpose earlier in the dungeon, as the team did kind of get themselves killed to make sure that they get rezzed upstairs by the Holy Paladin. So an extra death there, plus the unavailability, Jack, it's early, of that cheat death for the Rogue. They do move upstairs. Now, a lot of tricky trash here in form of these imps. A lot of casts similar to the imps that we've seen in some of the other maps. You want to make sure you interrupt them, otherwise the tank will get nuked, similar to the ones in the Court of Stars. Plus, you have all these kind of candle holders on the side that you want to make sure you interrupt before they drop their books. And if they do drop their books, you want to make sure you get that stun out, especially on those arcane anomalies.
Yeah, extremely big pull coming out of here on the side of Hadran. And keep in mind, he does not have Purgatory available to him, and this is going to be in a bolster setting. So having, you know, this really tight situation, everyone dropping very low by stacking on each other with Quaking, but also having very high requirements for being able to have that single target damage onto the priorities, making sure that, you know, Hadron immediately getting out as everything starts bolstering. Really good add damage, really good control on the side of Team Omegasniped here, really preventing a lot of bolsters.
And we see that banish come out of Zyronic just before they started AoE, preventing one of those higher health scavengers from getting too many bolstering stacks, but likely also proccing the Cephas, which I would assume he's wearing at this point, and if not, then it did at least help with that CC. A lot of those books going down. We can see the Arcane Anomaly book on the left side of the screen there, not anymore, but it does disappear as they do cleave it down effectively, getting ready to pull Gazerax, the eyeball, kind of mini boss of the dungeon. Does a lot of damage once you are required to turn around and make sure you avoid his AoE hit, but then he pumps out a ton of damage on the group, Jack.
Yeah, at that point, you're really weighing, depending on the level of the key, whether you're going to be able to have everybody stacked up, whether you're going to try to have everything outranged, because you will be able to move just past 40 yards to be able to, you know, dodge any of the extra damage that you'll be doing. But they are pulling Gazerax in with the rest of these little impacts to be able to pump out a little bit more single target damage here. This is probably where you're going to see CDs coming out for Luffy to make sure he's keeping the entire group topped off here.
And the tank as well, as we see a lot of damage go out on Hadrian. There are a lot of those imp casts getting off. The eyeball boss doing so much damage. We're really going to have to keep an eye on how things unfold here. But this mob, the Gazerax, can be buffed by bolsters, so they have to make sure not to kill the scavengers and the imps who have substantially lower health than Gazerax first. Otherwise, they're going to have a wipe situation on their hands. Of course, haven't forgotten about Skyline.D on the left side of the screen as they just wrap up their Bloodlust. 46% now on Agronox. I mean, they got their work cut out for them. They've been set back quite significantly with no huge advantage to trash.
Yeah, we've seen a Holy Avenger going up for Luffy, as you are seeing Zongo going down, Luffy going down. There are so many bolsters that were like really close to happening. I think it only took a couple bolsters to make sure that Zongo and Luffy were going down. It was a little bit of a delay getting Holy Avenger out there, though, to be able to be properly prepared. And not everybody was completely topped off going into it. So I would have kind of liked to see maybe a little bit better preparation or more preemptive to try to preempt some of that damage there. But they are able to mop up the rest of these mobs. You are seeing Thrash Fight coming down here. So it's not too bad of a catch-up that they have to do, but that's a little thing, especially on their counter pick, that you really just hate to see.
Brother of Smash Fight, if we did the research correctly, if I remember from previous weeks. Now, we do see those Arcane Anomaly books getting bolstered there by the remaining mobs, but Zyronic doing well to spot fear them, making sure.
Could do those research for Thrash Bite.
No, it's Thrash Bite. I said he's brother of Smash.
Oh, his brother of Smash Bite, yeah.
Talk about this at home. But we do see Thrash Bite being pulled here. A lot of damage coming into that AoE area. Still residual damage on the group, but if you are caught in that zone, it does a ton of damage and punts you back should you survive that. Main mechanic to this boss really being that he will fixate one of the players and run into a bookcase, spawning 2 extra tomes. We all know Thrash Bite hates reading, so to prevent this, you can actually immune. In this case, you do have the bop advantage coming out of the Holy Paladin, as we see that go up on Zyronic right now. Eats it in the middle, no bookcase is destroyed, and of course no books have spawned as a result. And based on their damage, that's probably going to be the only charge they get this fight.
Yeah, at this point, they're able to so rapidly neutralize Thrash Bite here. You know, also saving, you know, the books, saving knowledge, which we all want to be able to cherish here. As Skyline.D is just now starting to deal with Thrash Bite's room, and they're going much smaller, of course, than their opponents here. So I think this is really a big point here. Is Omegasniped, this is their counter pick. They want to be making more, be playing more cleanly. But when they're going to be at the disadvantage, you know, if they're going to be able to win this. They want to make sure that they're at least able to kind of calm their nerves down. They're able to kind of get into the flow that they need to, because once they start getting rolling, as we've seen in the NA regionals, they're just able to tear through teams.
So this is going to be an interesting pull here, because oftentimes teams filter about the 80% of the mobs that run out and go to the portal. They filter them together, CC them, and place down a ring of peace to prevent them. But they have to be really careful here with that bolstering. If they mismanage the damage on this mass amount of mobs, they're going to end up with some massive imps on their hand that could easily wipe the group. The only 5 group that will not despawn is the left side of the screen there, the 3 Hellblaze imps plus the scavengers. Those you actually have to fight. Everything else in this room tries to run up the stairs like a coward and disappear into the Cathedral of Night.
Yeah, at this point, they're just getting themselves well set up here. They are having, of course, that banish going out to be able to proc the Sephuz here, getting everything tightly grouped in together. You know, they're having very strong positioning. I like the positioning as Ironic here, making sure he's at the top of the stairs. He was getting there very quickly with his lock gate, making sure that they're able to get everything all in together as the group is going to be following up with them, making sure they're getting that stun there just to be able to neutralize them as rapidly as possible, and they're pulling this off phenomenally.
Yeah, that was great. So he did actually have leg sweep instead of the Ring of Peace, so he got that stun in that 5-second stun right away, finishing them off. Really bolstered mobs there, so a couple of them do leak through the portal, unfortunately. Now, I'm not sure if Team Omegasniped planned for a few of them to leak by accident. We do see that pre-banished mob coming out now as they cleave it, or they DPS it down, getting ready to move upstairs to the spider area. You know, they're going to have to account for that, because we have talked to them in the past and some other teams who have missed a couple of % on this map, and their excuse was always a couple of those imps leaked through the portal. So about 4 of them leaked there, so we're going to have to see if they pull extra or if they had this planned all along. Only 10% left on the board for them. They should easily be able to make up the rest of the trash between this room and, of course, the 4 bats that spawn after Dominatrax, the 3rd boss.
Yeah, at this point, they're making sure they're getting the sap out onto the Enforcer there, skipping around, and you probably see the sap might switch gears into that Orb Caster. If they don't want to have to worry about it there it is. It goes out right there. They are going to be able to get about 4.5 or 5% from some of the bats at the top after they kill the 3rd boss here. So this should be able to wrap up just enough of their trash. So it looks like it was good planning on their part, knowing that some mobs, especially in a bolstered situation, would kind of get through and escape to the portal here. So it looks like it's going to be very good trash percentage here out of Omegasniped.
Nalasha getting pulled to the side. Now all the players are grouped up on top of her for 2 reasons. One is you don't want her to blink to one of the players that's too far away and then start doing her frontal, as you do get slowed when she blinks, making it very difficult to get out of the way of the frontal. So doing well here to group up, but the other advantage, of course, being the patrol that eventually will lose its sap CC. If they fail to re-CC it, it will pat quite close to where they are. No problem for them here, and Hadrian does manage to kind of get away from these spiderlings that do a ton of damage, especially with that poison dot that they stack up. Luffy, of course, having that relief every 8 seconds with the Dispel for the poison, but nonetheless, they will do a ton of damage. As we can see, Hadrian already copying a more defensive playstyle here, kiting the spiders around in circles as they start to get bolstered, and will soon head up the stairs as they reach that lower health.
Yeah, he really doesn't want to have to use extra cooldowns. He really doesn't want to use, for example, any of his Purgatory here, because you will be having to deal with the next boss, which would be very dangerous. A lot of big threats there, and you are actually seeing the Dispel coming out of Fired Up here, making sure he's able to get the poison spell out onto Hadrian. It's such a nice little bit of extra utility that can come out for the rest of the team to make sure that that can happen as Luffy was upstairs, starting some of the RP event to be able to spawn that first boss, as Skyline.D is just now getting halfway through Thrashbite.
Yeah, I mean, Skyline.D is, since their hiccup, they've performed very well, but it just set them back so far, especially for Team Omegasniped. This is their map. This is their pick. This is their favorite map, the one that they come out strong with, the one that when we talked to them, this they said is their strongest map, and they're showing why that's the case as they move upstairs and get ready for Dominatrax, the 3rd boss of the dungeon, which is available to them as we speak. Now, about this boss, at 90 and 50%, he will spawn 2 portals, one of them, the first set of 2 being near the entrance of the room, which will continue to pour imps out, and if the Portal Guardian, the little fire elemental that you'll see, is not killed by the time he finishes that approaching Doom cast, it will spawn a larger kind of Felguard elemental that does a ton of damage to the group. So you want to make sure to control these mobs. And the imps, of course, nothing to scoff at. They do a ton of damage. That cast hits for about 4 or 5 mil, and the tank needs to grab it too. Melee's quite hard as well, but we do see that Vanish come out from Zyronic as one of the imps is controlled on the side, and the first 2 Portal Guardians are well dealt with.
Yeah, and you're seeing Luffy actually helping out Zyronic onto that second portal ad, making sure that they're going to be able to just get those down together and that the rest of the melee doesn't actually have to move around in the process here. We are seeing as they went into the Aegis of Agrimar here, you're dealing a little bit less damage to everybody. You're also dealing less healing. So at that point, it's okay even if you have Quaking going out. You're actually not going to be hurting yourselves that much at all here. And they're just now getting to the 50% mark right after the Chaotic Energy went out. So they're quickly able to get onto the next portal side without having to worry about any of the casts going out from the boss.
These mistresses come up right now from the side. Now, the danger about them, especially right now during the chaotic energy, is that these mistresses will do an AoE shadow cleave that will punt players out of the area. So you want to make sure not to stack them at the shield in the middle of the room, as they do have the potential to kind of hit the players out of that safe area right before that chaotic energy go out, and that would lead to a rather chaotic situation, if I do say so. But they are dealt with. The Portal Guardians are down. Only 2 mistresses left. They cleave them down effectively, and Dominatrax will be entering his soft enrage phase in just a moment, where he will increase his attack speed and damage on the tank slightly. Already hitting pretty hard, as you can see Hadrian getting some chunked health there, but should be no problem for them to finish this boss off. Skyline.D doing their pulls right now as they've downed Thrashbite and are working their way up to the 3rd boss.
Yeah, at this point, they're just playing a lot more safely here. They're getting, their mistress down, but they've kept it up for such a long time to allow Zongo to get that Shuriken Storm in, get the extra combo points out, funnel in more single target damage here. But it's phenomenal control out of the group to make sure that they're not impeding each other's damage, not actually, hurting each other's AoE, or sorry, single target damage by, spamming a little bit of extra AoE on the side here, and they've just set up such a phenomenal advantage for themselves here.
So the 4 bats, the Dreadwings, do come down from the windows. Now the final percentage that Team Omegasniped needs prior to Mephistroth spawning the final boss of the dungeon. Not the most dangerous boss in the world. They will have to deal with 1 phase 2 rotation at their DPS level in this 23. But as long as the tank keeps that shield going well, and we'll talk about that in a second, should be of no concern to them. Of course, they will not have that Bloodlust available. As we see, they have 4 minutes and 30 seconds on that cooldown for them. Skyline.D now dealing with Nalasha, getting ready to move up to Dominatrax. 1 minute left on their Bloodlust, rather, not Battle Res.
I love seeing the positioning out of Hadrian as he was kiting those bats away. He was actually dipping in and out of melee range to be able to get some extra damage out onto them, then running out before the Shadow Strike went out. So it creates a nice consistency for the rest of the DPS, where they're not just immediately having to run a whole great distance and then catch up and then stop or anything like that. So really great control as they're going on in Mephistroth here. But you are seeing right off the pull, one of the Spires is getting spawned into melee. You really want to see Luffy standing a little bit further out to be able to kind of bait those away.
The problem is he does want to take advantage of his damage and, of course, his mastery, increasing the healing on that melee, so that's why you see him piling in there. But, of course, the cost of that will be the Spire spawn in the melee area, as it will target 2 non-tank units, usually preferring ranged, but, of course, we do know Holy Paladins are considered a melee unit. We do see Fang go down on the left side, and Purg proc over for the Blood DK for Skyline.D. Looking a bit of a sloppy pull, something that we saw Hadrian be so defensive about with the remaining Spiders after the Lasha, has cost Skyline.D just a bit of health there, and they're only at 81% trash, so that's going to be really interesting for them. They're going to have to kill the 3rd, 4th boss and hightail it back through the dungeon. It's phase 2 here for Team Omegasniped, as the tank Hadrian there protects Illidan, the blind, obviously, from the middle area, from those purple balls from the side from the images. If any of them hit, it will extend the phase jack with that increasing damage.
I'm seeing better saves here than the World Cup right now, as Hadrian's doing an excellent job holding on to the shield here, defending Illidan and making sure they're able to get through this phase so rapidly here. Great plays.
One of those balls does hit Hadrian, but we are out of this phase as the remaining images despawn, and Mephistroth himself re-reveals himself as the teams get prepared to go through phase 1 again. Now, this phase 1, the first one that you encounter in the fight, he's at about 60 energy already, so the last 40 seconds, usually perfect for Bloodlust, of course, which is not available to them. This one, he starts at 0 energy, so they should be very comfortably able to kill the remaining percentage on Mephistroth and tie this series up in just a moment, as he will not enter another second phase. They just need to keep a good head about them.
Yeah, at this point, they've done such an excellent job to be able to make sure they have that strong positioning. And last time that we actually saw Omegasniped in Cathedral was when they actually had fired up onto the mage here. So it really goes to show, as they're adapting their compositions, is, they're looking at how they can edit their strategies from the regionals to this point. The extra confidence being able to bring in, the double melee here. That's worked so well for them going into the series. And this has got to be the big confidence boost for them.
I mean, that's just it. And, we've said this 100 times already, so let's make it 101. This is the map that they said is their biggest strength, the one that they feel best trained with. But my biggest concern, really, I mean, a lot of the teams we talked to said, obviously main strategies, if we've kind of seen this theme of this MDI is that we can hear some clapping in the background right now. That is not Jack, just so you know at home. That is actually Team Omegasniped. But the biggest concern I have that we're going to talk about later, and Rob, I'm sure you'll mention this as well, is really the fact that they were banking on that first map win. So there's a huge advantage going into Skyline.D into the 3rd game.
For sure, there are other obstacles to be tackled, but for now, Team Omegasniped stays on the board. They get that all-important first win in the series, looking very good on their pick. Will this persist, though? We will have to see after the break, or will Skyline.D be able to close it out on their pick? you're keeping score, that's now 2 straight for the alliances. I just want to point out we're currently winning, so sorry guys. We do have a tie game though when it comes to our actual series here. Team Omegasniped was able to bust out their counter pick and get the win over Skyline.D. Now, Sloot, you brought it up before we went into break. When we interviewed all these teams, most of them were pretty sure, like, okay, if we don't win that first map that we've really been practicing for, we're in dire straits. But I think Team Omegasniped even more than the other teams, with the exception of Hadrian, were just pretty much like, yeah, we lose if we don't win that first map. So, you know, now they're at that point where they have to kind of overcome. They're definitely in a deficit situation.
You said it. We've said it a few times in 102 now. You know, we'll talk about this again. It's just we had a chance to sit down with all these teams. Unfortunately, not the ones in China. They weren't able to join us here. They're at their own LAN in Shanghai. But, you know, we talked to them, and of all 6 teams that we managed to talk to, it really seemed that Team Omegasniped was the most uncomfortable about losing that first match. It seems like they banked a lot of their strategy in winning that first and third, as we've seen in the tournament, beyond any other team. Now, there was a bit of disagreement amongst the team, as you said, with Hadrian. He was confident that that wouldn't be a problem, but, you know, we'll see. I mean, now they're in that situation that they hated to be in.
Now, as we said, though, they did get a first win, and obviously that's what really matters here, is just keeping the series alive. Certainly there is a lower bracket, and they're no stranger to it, but that's not really how you want to start your day given the choice. Sours, what did we see them really do well in their pick on Cathedral?
They were just executing all of their pools incredibly well. We didn't see any of like the slop that we may have seen at the end of their extremely long day during the regionals, where they had like a 12-hour day of constant games. And so here we're looking at the really big pool after the second boss, and just how well they executed this pool. They come into this with really high kill count. They get excellent grip off, and they stun everything perfectly. See the leg sweep going for full duration. The DFA, everything's going really cleanly, and everything starts to die really evenly, which is the most important thing to do with this bolstering affix. Of course, these low health mobs may look low health, but when they have enough bolstering stacks, they could have just as much health as a full HP mob. And so they do a really good job cleaning up here. We see kill count go 74, 80, and it keeps on climbing up and up. And when Skyline.D attempted this same pool later, when they finally got up to this point, they hit that 74% kill count mark, and they stayed there, and they didn't go past it. So Omegasniped just executing everything so cleanly in this dungeon, showing that Skyline.D is in fact human. And you know, this is the first game that they've dropped in this entire tournament, and it was done here by our boys, Team Omegasniped.
Yeah, I mean, all of our boys here are our boys. We're not just rooting for the North American boys, okay? We love all the boys. But, Jack, first map loss now for Skyline.D. Do you feel like in this situation, at this level, that is going to potentially set them back and is going to potentially mess with their mindset, or do we feel like they're probably good?
Obviously, they're very good, right? Without a doubt. But it also kind of highlights what I kind of mentioned before the series, is how much is Skyline.D going to take away from Western teams? What are they really looking at as they're able to analyze these? And as you saw, like almost every single Western team who was having extremely good Cathedral times was kind of having that, you know, that leap of faith, having everybody dying at the start, having their healer running ahead to be able to, you know, get the res off to them. So them not actually going into that, I think is a pretty strong point for Omegasniped as they're going into the next pick, where they say, oh yeah, like Skyline.D is going to pick this next, but they may not actually have as well-refined strategies as the rest of the other regions.
Yeah, for sure. We'll have to see what Skyline.D chooses again. They're just going to have such a momentous advantage, as we have seen over the course of this tournament with that third map pick. For Team Omegasniped, as we said, they weren't necessarily looking super comfortable, but okay, I's going to be the third pick here, and I would say so far is the standout map of this tournament in terms of how people have approached it. Sours, what do you make of this pick?
So Ivashara is kind of an interesting pick, but at the same time, a little bit expected. This is the losers round of 4, the first round of the lower bracket map. So this is a map, of course, that this team is going to be very practiced on. It's something that we did talk about earlier. There are new affixes in the Ivashara this time around. Say goodbye to the explosive orbs. We are now dealing with skittish, necrotic, tyrannical in Ivashara. And so we talked about how that last boss, tyrannical, it may only be a 23, but it's very scary in here.
Speaking of scary, this is going to be the first time we're actually seeing skittish in this tournament. Obviously, that's new to the Global LAN Finals. Ted, what's it like being skittish?
Are you asking about the game or me myself?
We're going to go with the game for the purposes of, I think, this broadcast being rated PG.
I mean, since we have, of course, this relatively new affix, at least to the MDI world for those at home, what this means, it won't be an easily visually detectable affix, but what it does is it reduces the overall threat that the tank produces on the on anything in this dungeon, really. So a lot of the big pulls that you might see teams do where the tank kind of gets a bit of aggro, starts to run away, could provide a bit of complexity, if you will, or danger perhaps for the rest of the team as they kind of get some more threat with their damage and on the mobs. Necrotic, of course, Jack, nobody's any stranger to, especially the healer and tank, as increasing stacks will decrease the amount of healing and absorb that the tank can get on them by 3% per stack. So, of course, when you reach that 34 stacks, you are literally unhealable.
Yeah, but at this point, you are seeing Omegasniped pulling everything into Parjesh here. They are just getting that first pack that is kind of just guarding Parjesh very closely here, getting it all in. And like you said, having to deal with Necrotic, especially when you're pulling extra mobs into the boss, you know, is going to add so many extra hazards for them to deal with to be able to actually get through. So they are popping Bloodlust here, and it's very important to be able to make sure they're able to maximize as much damage as Zongo can, while still making sure that Hadron is going to be able to drop his stacks cleanly and efficiently.
So Skyline.D opting to kill the trash prior to engaging Warlord Parjesh, but we do see that Bloodlust come up on their side as well, as Team Omegasniped on the right side is just finishing up with theirs. 15 seconds left on the timer for that. The trash getting cleaned up now. Unlike the two maps that we saw before this, there is no more bolstering, meaning that they can freely kill the mobs as quickly as they want to cut out some of that danger. Skittish, as long as the tank is providing a ton of damage, will be able to hold aggro onto them. As we do know, of course, for just those at home, threat is just damage done by the tank times a multiplier, so the easy way to overcome the Skittish affix is to just play more offensively and gear more offensively as the tank.
Yeah, at this point you are seeing, 50% was the mark where Bloodlust had faded away for Omegasniped here. As you're seeing, Skyline.D just a little bit behind because they were not actually pulling all those extra mobs into the boss. They weren't actually getting all that extra cleave damage that Omegasniped was actually able to take advantage of. So, while there is a little bit of disparity in terms of trash percentage here, it looks like Omegasniped is really coming out strong in this dungeon.
No, we did see typically from the EU and NA teams is that after Parjesh falls for Team Omegasniped here, they do kind of a big pull with all the Naga surrounding the area. Some teams actually have quite some trouble with that, so we'll have to see how they pull it off, especially with the Necrotic. Now, it's not too bad, the Necrotic. The tank can just run away to reset the stacks as long as they provide enough threat, especially under this skittish circumstance that they have to deal with. Parjesh now down to 16% after that huge DFA for Team Omegasniped. Should be falling quickly as they deal with the two mobs on the side, wanting to make sure, of course, that you leave one of the two mobs alive, usually the Crest Rider, so that they can eat the spear to the face and not have one of the players deal with it, and of course not having to use that bot for no reason in this tyrannical setting.
And they do a very good job making sure that they're able to kind of get away from the rest of those mobs here. You do still have to watch out for the dot that went out just before the boss had actually ended up dying here. So you are going to see a couple extra heals going out onto Zyronic, making sure that he's going to be topped off before they start moving on to the next trash packs here. We are going to be seeing an interesting route coming out as they're going to be going actually to the left side rather than moving on into the direction of Lady Haycoil.
Yeah, I haven't seen this route, honestly, since early beta and Legion, when most teams would just kind of go this way. There's a lot of danger in the kind of cave that they're going to on the side. There's one of the giants that they have to deal with, which teams usually kind of opt to skip at all costs. We are in that tyrannical setting, so the trash is not really as dangerous, so not too surprising to see some kind of new strats and pulls. We'll have to see how this works out for Team Omegasniped. Skyline.D has now downed Parjesh and will re-stealth past that group of three that they jumped past earlier to engage Parjesh, and they're going down more of a traditional route, moving over to the left side of the instance.
It's got to be a very good part of, of extra confidence that we're seeing out of the side of Omegasniped, where, yes, this was not their pick, but they already have some very interesting strategies coming up that we have not actually seen in the MDI yet before.
And of course, as we pay attention, we do have Skittish here, and we do see that the logo representing Skittish down in the bottom has disappeared, as much of the mobs do with their Skittish and their threat. Zyronic does go down here, though, so a bit of damage and threat coming out to them. Unhealable amount of stacks on Hadron as he will go down too. It looks like this is a purposeful wipe, I would assume, here on the side as they kind of run through, and we do see that failure detection pylon going down. So indeed, this was intended. They save that extra death from Zongo, who can just safely stealth through everything, saving the 5 seconds. Will res everybody up safely on the other side of the dungeon, or maybe they won't actually. It looks like they kind of failed with the failure detection pylon, so obviously the pylon was not working properly. So we're going to have to see what their plan B here is, if they're just going to kind of end up doing it again, but that is going to cost them a bunch of time, and it's just allowing Skyline.D with this more traditional route on the left side of the screen, as we see it puffed up here on the main monitor, getting ready to deal with those two Arcanists, which will spawn the Lady Haycoil.
And at this point, they are just making sure they're able to neutralize all these mobs. You are seeing, like you said, that kind of traditional pull as they're pulling all the Gilbins that they can to make sure they're bringing them back again into the Arcanist when they're going to be able to get everything neutralized in together. And that's the thing you've always been able to see. And, one of the most fun parts of Ivashar, when you're able to get these very, very large trash pulls in, have everybody neutralize them as rapidly as possible here. But it's also the skittish and also the extra danger there. So you might actually see, the tank start getting some distance here when all the mobs are breaking out of their Chaos Nova here, but also having to watch out for on the side of just the triple favorable melee composition here, any of the mobs are going to be, you know, just dropping their threat and just start trying to whack the melee here. So really good control on the side of Skyline.
So a bit more trouble coming out of Team Omegasniped on the right side as Ironic does go down. They're dealing with some of the trash in that cave right now, including that giant, which does quite a bit of damage AoE, but also the stun during all the trash being surrounded. So a bit of danger towards the tank there. Skyline.D doing an excellent job. Now both teams have an advantage to kind of counter this skittish that we didn't mention yet, Jack, in the rogues. The rogues will provide that tricks of the trade, which redirects all of their threat for 30 seconds, if I'm not mistaken, onto the tank, meaning that some of these big pulls, especially at the start, will be a lot easier for the tank, and they're kind of able to start kiting a bit earlier should it be too dangerous, like with that Mass Gilbin pull that we just saw.
Yeah, it really shows just how well they're able to actually, you know, control all the trash and be able to make sure that they're not going to be able to get any extra percentages here. Also very nice, you know, that you don't have to deal with any of the fortified hydras here, which can just deal tons and tons of damage, especially as you're unable to actually heal yourself as the necrotic stacks start going up. But you're seeing on the side of Mayu here, getting very good positioning to start face pulling a lot of the other trash. That way he's able to stay mounted up here, grabbing everything, bringing it all in together there. That way, the second that they're done with the Hydra, they don't actually have to move to be able to encounter any other mobs. They're just simply able to get on top of the next set and start progressing further and getting ready for Lady Hatecoil.
Yeah, I mean, just really excellent, clean play here from them. Excellent done by Maya, and just shows as well the strength of that Blood DK being able to handle themselves with the support of the team, getting ready to peel any of the trash that would kind of not allow those necrotic sets to, necrotic stacks, excuse me, to reset. Team Omegasniped dealing with that double giant pull right before King Deepbeard. One of the more dangerous pulls that we often see teams just skip entirely with the boat skip, or either pulling to the side and everybody runs through. So interesting to see them deal with it. I guess they're feeling more confident in this tyrannical setting, but we do see another cheat death proc for Zongo there. Luckily no death on the board, but he won't have that security later. Skyline.D, I mean, Miyu's just running circles around all of these crabs, but they didn't end up going for Lady Hatecoil. Rather, they are working their way towards Serpentrix, who of course was knighted in England recently.
Is that so? Yeah, at this point, you know, you have to look at when you're going to be using your Bloodlust, and ideally in a tyrannical format, you want to make sure that you're going to be able to have Bloodlust available for, of course, Lady Hatecoil. So at this point, you're able to kind of weigh your options, whether you want to go right to Serpentrix here or, without using Bloodlust, or if you want to be able to clear as much trash and just get all of your trash percentage until Bloodlust comes back, and then engage with Lady Hatecoil here. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, how long they're going to be able to take with the rest of this trash, because they have mopped up almost all of the board here that they're going to really need. So at this point, you are seeing Evil going down. How much do they actually need to be, and how long is it really going to take for them to take down Serpentrix before they move on to Hatecoil?
Serpentrix, indeed. A team of Omegasniped working on King Deepbeard on the right side of the screen, so very opposite pathing from these two teams right now. The more unconventional route going definitely in the way of Team Omegasniped. Not something we see teams do, but this tournament, this weekend here, so we're going to see a lot of this creativity flair from the groups as they've tried and practiced to death a lot of these strategies. So it should be in their wheelhouse here. It could be any team's game right now, but certainly looking a bit more advantageous for Skyline.D, as they're already at 85% of trash. So they're probably just going to bang out these two bosses and get ready to move upstairs to Deepbeard with that boat skip, Jack.
Yeah, at this point, you know, they're about halfway through, or almost halfway through King Deepbeard as Skyline.D is engaging with Serpentrix here. But like you said, the trash percentage makes a world of difference as we're going on to this. So you would be expecting Omegasniped to just be taking some very large risks here, because at this point, you know, there is not really much of a death disparity going on. So at this point, it's going to be a lot on how well they're going to be able to pull. Oh, sorry, there's a bit more of a death disparity, but it's going to be a lot on how they're going to be able to pull the trash quickly and efficiently.
Right, you are. And I would say in terms of efficiency, there's definitely a bit of efficiency lost with those two giants in favor of Skyline.D that Team Omegasniped decided to pull. Now, let's talk a bit about these bosses real quick before they disappear forever from our monitors. King Deepbeard on the right side, of course, will do that quake on the team, which will kind of spawn an area under the team, under each player, and you want to make sure you move out of that fissure, because 5 seconds later it will pulse for an immense amount of damage. So you want to make sure that you're kind of baiting it to save some of the real estate in the area. Players will also have those absorb bubbles cast on them, and if you don't take enough damage to break the bubble, it will hit the entire ult for the remaining amount of absorb on the bubble. Nightmare as usual, Jack. Otherwise, there's just a frontal on the tank, a frontal area that they can easily move out of, no problem there. And Serpentrix has his own nightly duties as well with his abilities, Jack, if you want to run through those.
Yeah, that's right. And you're seeing, you know, a lot of the puddles that are being dropped onto the different players here. It's very important to make sure that they're able to just either slowly kite them out, or even if you want to just stand in that same spot, they don't actually ramp up in terms of damage here. So if you're able to just slowly get everything pretty well stacked up together, reduce any of the area effect that they really have to worry about here, it makes it a lot easier, especially when we're going to melee competition, for everybody to get around and actually reduce the damage going out. There will also be 2 transition phases as we're entering the second one of those, where Serpentrix will spawn, you know, the Arcane and the Blazing Hydra heads. You will have to, of course, interrupt the Enrage that's going out by Serpentrix, but then, of course, killing each of the heads on the side, keeping them stunned or interrupted to reduce the damage going out on the group, and then going back into Serpentrix there.
Well, you know what they say, Jack, 3 heads are better than 1. The Arcane one being of particular danger to the team, as it will cast Arcane Blast on a member, and every successful cast will increase its damage done, eventually one-shotting one of the members. So you want to make sure to kick, interrupt, whatever you need to do to it, silence it, to just keep it locked down. The teams have killed the 2 remaining heads. The team, rather, has to kill the 2 remaining heads for Skyline.D, and Serpentrix will be soon falling. Keep in mind, though, for those at home, they do have to double back and go back to Lady Haycoil. Jack, as you well pointed out earlier, their Bloodlust is just about to come off cooldown, almost perfectly, quite frankly, as they will move over and use it on Lady Haycoil, which in this tyrannical setting, I would say is one of the scarier bosses in here with that Focus Lightning.
Yeah, at that point, especially in the tyrannical, like you said, you really have to be rotating through defenses at around a 23, making sure that, everyone has the tools that they need to be able to survive, maybe playing a little bit more defensive here to be able to have some classes using Pride Heads if they really need it. But ideally, if you're able to have everybody, and as offensive here as possible, that's going to be the ideal. But Omegasniped has so much that they need to be able to catch up on here. As Serpentrix goes down, they're at 90% in terms of trash percentage, and then Omegasniped is not even halfway there.
Team Omegasniped still dealing with a quite big pull here right now. Keep an eye on starting in the necrotic setting, and Hadrian does not have that perg available as he just kind of runs around making sure to dodge all of these lightning areas, making sure to reset his stacks as well. Now, the Hydras themselves don't move as quickly as some of the other mobs, but they can't be slowed by a lot of the traditional means, so you want to make sure you build a really good distance between yourself and them to reset your stacks if he does not have that anti-magic shell available to him on a 1-minute cooldown. Could be using the Legendary Cloak, which extends the duration of that AMS to 10 seconds, perfectly overlaying the necrotic stacks. Not sure if he's wearing that right now, but it's possible that he will, especially for this pull, just swapping it out quickly. Skyline.D has now pulled Lady Hatecoil on the left side, the big screen here, and as we can see, indeed did use their Bloodlust.
Yeah, at that point, it's very important to make sure that you're watching out for the 2 basic big mechanics. You just saw the Focus Lightning going out there, which you should stand away from the sandbars. That way you're not going to be able to destroy those. Then in just a second, you're going to be able to have, the other AoE that's going to be, electrifying all the water around, where you're having the Static Nova, and you want to make sure that everybody's standing on those sandbars to avoid any of the extra lightning, and which will also stun you. So very important to make sure you're kind of keeping all these adds alive as long as possible, just so that MGT is going to be able to keep up that damage. But again, you do have to still worry about the necrotic stacks here.
And that's exactly what I want to mention, Jack. And I also wanted to mention that you want to stay away from other players with that Focus Lightning, as you've taught me, unfortunately, a few times, that it will clip other people around you. But that's just it. The necrotic here is kind of a double-edged sword. They want to get that extra single target damage out of leaving those globules alive, especially in favor of the rogue. Well, not in favor of everyone almost, but rogue especially, getting a lot of those combo points from that AoE onto the adds. But, the double-edged sword here is that there will be a lot of necrotic stacks on the tank, and you can see really well there the previous Static Nova before this. I like what they're doing again right here is they put that Ring of Peace down, allowing the adds, or disallowing the adds, to have access to the tank during that Static Nova when they're locked to an island, and decreasing the amount of necrotic stacks. So really clever play here by Skyline.D.
Yeah, I really like the extra control, and they even rotated through Typhoon as well to make sure that when they didn't quite have Ring of Peace available to them, or they didn't have the Chaos Nova available to them to actually rotate through it, they had something to kind of keep the distance, as Rain was doing a great job being able to drop his necrotic stacks, and they're just absolutely melting this boss here, as Serpentrix is only at 50% here for Team Omegasniped.
Yeah, they still have to deal with his second phase, of course. Some teams do opt to skip the 2 heads in the second phase and just try to burn the boss down from 33. A bit more dangerous to do in this tyrannical setting, but Lady Hatecoil going down to 2% now, about to fall here for Skyline.D. 10% trash left on the board for them. I believe you need a 92% though before killing the last 4 mobs, which will give you access to Wrath of Ashar. So they do have a bit more damage to do here, probably 1 or 2 mobs left. They have marked a skull on that crab up ahead. Not sure if they're planning on dealing with it, after which we will see them do the traditional, or what has become traditional, boat skip leading up to King Deepbeard.
Yeah, at this point, they really just put themselves closer to the boat, making sure they're going to be able to deal with that quickly and get Deepbeard down. They might opt to actually pull maybe one of the seagulls that's up there, or maybe one of the snails, to be able to get a little bit extra cleave damage off onto the boss there. We'll have to see, but with the snail and the triple melee composition, it actually can be quite problematic, having to actually have the frontal AoE going out for it. So it'll be interesting to see what they do here. Also, a big point to watch out for is that Omegasniped is not going to have Bloodlust available to be able to take on Hate Coil. So that fight will last quite a bit longer, and they will have to actually, you know, have a lot more attrition healing going out into the fight.
Yeah, it'll be quite dangerous as Skyline.D just does now engage King Deepbeard here. They still have 90% on the board, so they will have to kill one more mob. Now, it will be pretty easy for them to kind of pull something with the remaining 4 mobs, or if I'm not mistaken, I saw the snail on the side of the room there aggroed. Not sure who's going to actually end up handling that, or if it was a purposeful aggro nonetheless. They start chewing through King Deepbeard's health here, down to 83% already, as Serpentrix is going down for Team Omegasniped on the right side of the screen. And as you said, they will make their way over to Lady Hate Coil. Now, the problem is they're still lacking 36% trash, or minus the 8, let's say 28% that they still need to make up quickness, that they still need to make up for the rest of the dungeon before they even try to engage the final 4 mobs.
Yeah, and at this point you're seeing, you know, what I also want to point out is the great positioning on the side of Skyline.D here, because you will have the quaking that goes out regularly and puts down that extra zone that will then have an aftershock here. You want to be able to stack up all those quakings on top of each other and then moving away before the aftershock ends up hitting here, because all those aftershocks, if you stack 3 quakings onto the same spot, you're going to have 3 aftershocks going out at once here. So when you're having such a heavy emphasis on melee heavy compositions, you're going to see, you know, that almost a full compass around the boss of their specific quaking areas and trying to make sure everyone's staying in the same spot as much as possible here.
Yeah, they want to play it as safe as possible, and they're doing really well right now. I mean, there's a lot of area to this map that they can kind of cover if needed, but you don't have to use it if they don't need to, and it does create some problems as the tank's running away. Sometimes a frontal comes up, as we can see there, that circle right now on range, moves well out of it and back in onto his quaking spot. Team Omegasniped with a big pull, getting some of those Arcanists down. Keep in mind, they haven't even spawned the potential to get to Lady Hate Coil. You do have to kill 2 of those Arcanists on the side, as we saw one of them go down now, and they're kind of backpedaling towards where most teams end up after Parjesh, over on the Arcanist and Snail area right now.
And right here you're seeing, you know, I really like out of Mayu where he's actually holding aggro onto the Snail and kind of dragging it a little bit away from melee constantly, while still leaving it dotted up, while still contributing some damage into it, and ideally trying to keep it in range of maybe like the I-beam out of Fang or just any of the extra cleave damage that goes out. So it keeps it out of melee, it keeps it from dying immediately, but it also does an excellent job, I know, at the expense of, you know, more positioning, more movement on the side of Mayu to be able to make sure that that contribution is going out there. So I really like the play there. And
it's not too hard to move it around as it does move at snail's pace, just making sure it keeps around the boss for that cleave we just saw, as you mentioned earlier, that I-beam clipping the edge of the snail as well. So really well done by them. I'm loving this out of Skyline.D. I mean, the amount of coordination that they have between healer, tank, and group right now. The healer is running off, doing his own thing, trusting the rest of the group to stay alive, the tank to keep themselves alive, putting a hot or 2, a heal over time or 2 on the tank in the meantime, and just getting everything needed to go is just so clean here.
Yeah, I love seeing actually the snail was about to frontal the entire melee group there, because they actually had to coalesce and stack together after the quaking went out. But he did a great job actually hitting the Typhoon, get the grip in, get the asphyxiate onto the snail there to make sure they're able to shut it down right as the boss goes down, and they're at perfect trash percentage.
I mean, that would be rather slimy if it did go off, but they do move over, just like yourself, so do move over back to the casters leading up to the boss. Now, you can combine these together. The issue here is that there's a big space between these sorceresses here as they start to do just that. They are groupable, they are displaceable, of course, but there's a lot of interrupts that need to go out. We're not in a fortified setting, so should one of their casts get off, one of the lightning casts, the blast get off on one of the targets here, probably not an instant death, but they are kind of prepping them, and I like to see this slowly moving them towards the next mob and then pulling right away.
Yeah, you're seeing Hadrian actually going down here. Yeah, they pulled all these extra mobs into the boss, and it looks like it was just some kind of, it was a move that they just had to make, where they had to catch up onto trash percentage here, so they actually had to almost completely sacrifice Hadrian in order to do it, where if they were confident enough to be able to get all of those mobs down, they were able to actually have Hadrian go down during a static Nova, during a cast from the boss, get him quickly rezzed, get aggro back onto the boss, pick up the extra globules, which don't really deal too much melee damage, and then being able to kind of recover that pull. So it was a very risky move, but they executed it fairly well.
And they have to do it. They know where the other team's at this point. You know, they do have access to a monitor with the stream, if I'm not mistaken, like we do, so they can see that they're behind at this point. And not only do they have just this surmounting lead that they have to catch up on with Skyline.D, but we keep not talking about the fact that there's 25 seconds on the board in terms of deaths as well. So they had to do this. They had the battle res available, as you said, Jack, and they just had to go for it. Put them in a more advantageous position, I would say, but they still have 57% on Lady Hate Coil, while Skyline.D is working on their last Enchantress before having access to the Wrath of Ashara, the final boss of the dungeon.
Yeah, right here, and you're seeing, the last boss going down for them as Omegasniped is just at 50%. And at this point, you do kind of have to hope for just the worst on the side of Skyline.D for Omegasniped to be able to get back into this game here. And the 6 deaths, though, is just really killing them there. And a lot of it was kind of on the fact that their failure detection pylon just failed them. Where, they were able to get the res out onto, of course, fired up. He'd be able to get everybody else up. He'd be able to start getting the group back into position here. But the fact that they didn't have their Shroud of Concealment from the Rogue, they weren't able to, again, skip past that larger giant mob. It actually just messed all of their trash percentages up. They had to be able to take so much extra time to be able to get back into the game there. It really was such a risky play and taking a unique route, but it really just ended up biting them at the end of it.
I mean, I'm sure it's something that they've well practiced and it just didn't work out for them. But Skyline.D looking primed to take this series soon. Wrath of Ashar, of course, does start at 20%, but it does have the equivalent amount of raw HP to some of the other bosses in these dungeons. Important to note on this boss, there is a huge tank frontal, a huge area of denial that the tank and, of course, anybody else will have to move out of. There's also, Jack, that split damage that will go down on one player doing split physical damage. Now, you can immune it or try to CD through it, but in this tyrannical setting, it hits quite hard. So you want to make sure not only to have everybody soaking it together, but definitely to get some CDs out. Yeah,
at this point, you also have to look at how worth it's going to be and how dangerous it's going to be for the entire group to be able to actually take it. You were seeing Fang, for example, just immuning it at the start. You are going to see him running all the way out again to be able to take care of that himself here. So it'll be very interesting to see as you're seeing the Netherwalk going out, he's able to immune it. Reigns does actually have his Purgatory proc. He's just trying to drop his stacks here very quickly. When you're able to mix through things like Cheat Death or any of the extra CCs, or sorry, any of the extra immunities like Netherwalk here, it's amazing to be able to work off of. But if you also have the battle res left available to you, in many cases it's actually a lot safer to be able to just battle res somebody than have everybody stack up and soak.
And we had kind of a wipe there with a failure detection pylon coming out of Team Omegasniped, just making sure everybody is available and not having to run back. But that's extra deaths on the board that they don't need right now, and they still have to deal with those enchantresses, whilst Wrath of Ashara has already hit and gone beyond the halfway point for Skyline.D, doing well to kind of circle around the boss, as the more time you spend in one area, the more tornadoes will spawn there, and of course those frost waves on the side. Eepel does go down, but they have 2 battle reses available to them, and Bloodlust coming up in 2 seconds. Bit of extra damage coming up for the team in just a moment as we see that Bloodlust icon light up immediately, and they're going to try and take this home.
Yeah, at this point, they just want to make sure that instead of having everybody soaked, they just use a sacrifice, and they just got their res out onto them. And like I said, yeah, Bloodlust available, 5% left onto Wrath of Ashar here, as Omegasniped's just trying to do whatever they can to keep getting back into this game here, because at this point, any of the extra AoE damage going out is going to have to be immune or just have to be sacrificed here at this point. So they have almost a full Bloodlust duration before they actually had Fang going down there. They're getting the res off almost immediately here. There's a couple seconds left onto Bloodlust, and they're just burning the rest of the boss.
It was a purposeful death there, of course, with the debuff, wanting to make sure that it just doesn't threaten the team very much. Wrath of Ashar down to 3, and in a moment 2%, which is what goes below 3, Jack, if you didn't know.
Really?
But we'll be finishing this boss up in just a moment, in what honestly has been just another, I would say, back to typically dominant performance, at least a very clean performance that we've seen from Skyline.D in their regional. So we have seen that they're human, but certainly only for a moment here as they wrap it up, and Wrath of Ashar will be going down, and Skyline.D will be taking this 2-1.
Yeah, Wrath going down there. Skyline.D making good on kind of that excellent regional performance. And, we were questioning, China is oftentimes just a difficult region in esports to really kind of get to know, what are they doing on a regular basis. It's much less communication to the Western world, so we don't get a chance to monitor them as closely as some of the other teams. But I got to say, Skyline.D looked like they kind of patched up what most teams felt like would be their shortcoming. Were they going to be able to turn that creativity into raw speed? And, Sours, as we saw there, that is certainly something they were able to do in this first series against Team Omegasniped.
There was a couple really promising pulls coming out of Team Omegasniped, especially that going to the right path. Some might say they went the wrong way, but they unfortunately wiped at the end of it. Maybe something went a little bit south. The failure detection didn't quite go off just right. I think if Omegasniped had been able to pull that off, that route looked like it had very much the potential to be quite faster than the Skyline.D route was. The Skyline.D, like we saw in China, like the teams were talking about, they were very clean and very fast, but not as, they weren't like blowing the whole dungeon up. They're just executing their own clean strategy. Then Team Omegasniped takes these high-risk plays, and unfortunately they don't quite get that big reward out of it this time. But this will be, of course, the first map again that they will be playing tomorrow. They do have Team Omegasniped does have a full day break now to gather their thoughts and to rest up before the next stage of games. So they should be able to take this again tomorrow. Their time looked really good if they had just cleaned up a little bit, and we know they have that incredible cathedral up their sleeves. So these guys are still in it in my heart, and I think they can definitely climb out of this.
Yeah, well said. And I want to harp a little bit on that word you brought up, execution, because I think that was really where Team Omegasniped can improve, right? Go home. Nobody's actually out of the tournament today, so everyone has the opportunity, as you said, go home, kind of reset, look at what we did wrong, maybe some stage jitters again. For pretty much everybody, this is their first time on that land stage. So, you know, what do we think? This is, Jack, Team Omegasniped is going into familiar territory now. They lost the series. You know, what do you want to see them specifically kind of tune up for tomorrow?
Well, like you said, they're really no strangers to this situation. They have the exact same situation where they dropped in the lower bracket. They had the rest of the day to say, like, hey, what's going on? What can we fix? And when we had a chance to talk to them, they said a lot of it was just kind of nerves going into it, where, you know, there's a lot of little errors in execution, a lot of little problems that they ended up having was just a little bit of nerves going to them. So, like I said, they have the rest of the day. They have, you know, a ton of practice time ahead of them to be able to kind of fix that. And even if it's something as simple as, oh, the failure detection pylon didn't work, or we're leaning too much on this, or we didn't have, for example, Fired Up and Luffy dying at different locations with different pylons to make sure that we're going to have one of them work all the time, right? Those are the little things that, even if this wasn't their pick, they can easily win that, you know, if they're executing properly.
Ted, going into this, do you want to see them maybe do more of the actual practicing of running the dungeon, or would you rather see them kind of pull up the VODs, look at their individual mistakes, and kind of talk it through, if they have a limited amount of time?
For Team Omegasniped, I mean, I think their performance is great. I mean, we talked about it. Overall, it's just, the thing is, we're at a level of play right now, and we have been, honestly, in part of the regionals too, but we're at a level of play right now where one mistake is going to cost you the game against a team that executed so well as Skyline.D did. Skyline.D's, you know, they have a bit of slow and steady wins the race demeanor, if you will. I mean, their times are great, but as Sour said, of course, they're not blowing it out of the water. What I would like to see from them is they clearly practiced the strat for a reason. They didn't just say, hey, YOLO, we're going to do it today for the first time. It just slipped away from them, and I totally agree that if they just clean up maybe some of the nerves, maybe some of the sloppy play, whatever it may be, I mean, if any team can climb out of this loser's bracket, it's going to be them.
Yes, they certainly do have that going for them based on historical precedent. I do worry a little bit, again, because we did talk so much to this team. They do seem like kind of a team that maybe this gets in their head, so I'm certainly hoping they go back, you know, maybe have some food, have a good night of rest, and maybe don't let this get too much under their skulls there. Let's go and take a look, though, at the schedule. Again, this was the first series of the day. We have so much more MDI action coming up. We're going to be moving on to Shell's Angels taking on Gulch Trotters, and I'm super excited about this one. Shell's Angels was certainly